Well, welcome to the Aging Boomers. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, on our show, we discuss so many of the issues facing boomers, their parents, and what we know, of course, is an aging population. And I just want to thank everybody for all their support. So many of you have, shared our podcast with others, and we really appreciate it. Most of you actually, in our stats, listen to the show on your iPad or on your iPhone or Android phone. We have a free app. You just have to go to the Aging Boomers on your app, and then you could keep updated on all of our shows. Many of you have gone to iTunes or iHeartRadio or directly to our website, and we appreciate all that as well. So a lot of different ways to listen to the show, and we appreciate all your support. Want to remind you that today's show is sponsored by Senior Care Authority, a professional senior placement and elder care consulting organization that has a national network of advisors to help in determining the right path for senior living and receiving proper care. So whether it's in-home care, assisted living, residential or memory care, or just having an advocate to help you work through some of the challenges, you can certainly get the necessary advice from a senior care advisor in your area by calling Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231, or you could go directly to the website at www.seniorcareauthority.com. And listen, I'm always excited about our guests, but this is a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart and many of the listeners out there. We have with us Dr. Huntington Potter. He is the Professor of Neurology, member of the Linda, Crnic? I should have asked you ahead of time. Am I pronouncing that right, Center?
It's Crnic.
Crnic, I apologize. Of the Linda Crnic Center for Down Syndrome and Director of the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center at the University of Colorado. Anschutz, is that right? Or did I get that one
Correct.
Wrong too? All right, I got that one right. 1 for 2. Anschutz Medical Campus. He is devoted to studying the mechanistic relationship between Alzheimer's disease and Down syndrome. He is the author of over 100 scientific articles and books, is the holder of 15 U.S. and foreign patents, has sat on scientific advisory and review committees in academia, industry, and government, and has received numerous rewards for his work, including being selected one of Colorado's top thinkers of 2013 by the Denver Post. His electron micrographs of DNA are on permanent exhibit in the National American History Museum of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. It's certainly a pleasure and an honor to have Dr. Huntington Potter with us today. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Potter.
It's a pleasure, Frank.
Yeah, great to have you. I mean, we could have taken the rest of the show talking about all the accolades and everything about you. We had to cut it short a little bit. So
it's past history. We want to try to look to the future.
Yeah. So on that, let's maybe get right to the point that I think our listeners are interested in, and maybe tell us a little bit of what's going on in terms of current research with Alzheimer's. Certainly, I know you've done quite a bit of research regarding Alzheimer's and Down syndrome. Certainly, you could talk about that as well. But for those families out there and people out there that are just concerned about the future of their loved ones and themselves, tell us what's going on.
Well, the main problem, of course, is that advances in medical science has allowed all of us to live longer than our ancestors and even our parents. And that means that with cancer and heart disease at least being reduced in their severity or their danger, Alzheimer's disease comes to the fore. Basically, 40% or so of people over the age of 85 have Alzheimer's disease. And since we all hope to live at least that long, it's a very big problem for the entire Western, industrialized world, and coming to be a problem in the third world as well.
So it affects everybody, right? I mean, is there any research that shows that it affects a certain type of demographics, or basically everybody's at the same risk?
It's pretty much an equal opportunity catastrophe. Women are at slightly higher risk than men for various reasons, some of which we don't yet understand. But I think one should never feel laissez-faire about it. It's a problem for everybody.
Is it because women seem, as you know, we work in the assisted living and memory care and helping families, and certainly when I go into one of these locations, which I frequently go into, I would say 2/3 of the residents in these locations, at least, are female. So do you think it's because they're just outliving us?
Yes, I'd say that's a major reason. But in addition, estrogen is semi-protective, and of course, after menopause, women have less estrogen. Also, in the demographic that we have, facing us right now of the 85-year-olds, most women were not CEOs of General Motors and holding high stress, high cognitively demanding, jobs, and that kind of experience tends to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease as well.
Interesting. So stress-related, right? That's
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And exercise is also very important, and many men who are 85 now had physically demanding jobs, and that is actually protective.
Right. So what end of the research do you yourself get involved with? I know, tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've done.
Well, we have a very broad approach to studying Alzheimer's disease, in the sense that if we have an idea, we have a laboratory at the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center where we can begin to test the idea first in the test tube, and if it looks promising, then in cells in culture, mouse cells, rat cells, human cells. And then, again, if it looks promising, we would try it in the mice that get Alzheimer's disease. And finally, the best interventions or diagnostics can be tested in humans in the clinic, which is right across the street.
You know, I've had other researchers on, all right, and I've never asked this question. It just came to me, so I'm going to ask you. There's so much research going on all over the world regarding Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. How do you coordinate with each other? I mean, what if you're doing something and then somebody in Europe is doing something similar? I mean, how do you coordinate who's doing what?
Well, that's a very good question that applies to all science, and the answer essentially is that scientists love to talk about their work, and so there are many meetings, usually a few days to a week long throughout the year, in which scientists exchange their findings and compare notes, so to speak. They also, of course, publish, which comes a little bit later. But largely, we know what other people are doing and are very happy to talk about our own work. So there is coordination in that sense. There's also the fact that not every scientist, even swimming in the same information pool, comes up with exactly the same idea. So even though somebody in Moscow might be doing a project that is similar to ours, it's going to be slightly different, and that difference can give insights we might not have expected if we tried to do exactly the same thing.
Right. You know, being in the field and talking to many people, I mean, obviously, like Alzheimer's Association, other organizations, have these goals of let's cure the disease, okay, which is a wonderful thing, a wonderful goal. All right, but in my discussions with various people, that may not be a very realistic goal, at least in the, we'll have to define what short term is, but would you say that the disease versus curing it?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And the reason is that the disease in the brain usually starts about 20 years before the clinical symptoms become apparent. And that means that by the time a person comes to medical attention for memory problems, executive function problems, they've already lost a lot of nerve cells and a lot of nerve cell connections, and those are going to be very hard to replace. The nerve cell connections are a little bit easier to regrow than the nerve cells themselves, but I think that it's going to be the first step to try to develop an intervention that slows the course of the disease or actually halts it in its tracks, and then be able to apply it to people, let's say in their 50s or early 60s, that are showing the very first symptoms or may have a blood protein fingerprint that says that they're at risk, and the intervention would essentially prevent further decline. If that works, of course, we would try it in people who are at the full-blown Alzheimer's disease stage to see if it also slows them or maybe even helps them a little bit. But I think that's less likely to be successful.
Yeah. When we even use the term Alzheimer's, all right, and I know that's a term you're using in the discussion, but we know that Alzheimer's is a big part of the various forms of dementia, different percentages out there. Certainly the majority, at least, of the diagnosis seems to be Alzheimer's. But in this research, is it really doing research on the other forms of dementia, Lewy body and other forms of dementia as well?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And the reason for that is that the end stage of killing nerve cells is common for all of these disorders. So if we study Alzheimer's disease, we're going to get an insight into frontal temporal dementia. If we study Parkinson's, we may get an insight into Alzheimer's. So many labs study several to get an insight into how they're common and how they're different. Now, in our lab, for instance, we're very excited about the fact that we found that people with typical Alzheimer's disease actually develop Down syndrome-like cells in their body, including their brain, that have 3 copies of chromosome number 21 instead of 2 copies like all the rest of us have. That's why people with Down syndrome all get Alzheimer's disease, and these extra cells that are abnormal in people with typical Alzheimer's disease may contribute to their disorder as well. And we're looking at other degenerative diseases and beginning to find these cells there too. So we think that there's a common feature of all of these disorders, and if we can really understand what exactly that is and how to prevent it, we may be able to develop a intervention that will be broadly applicable.
Boy, I didn't realize it till you just said it. You're saying that anybody with Down syndrome, as long as they live long enough, will get Alzheimer's. Is that what I heard?
That's what you heard, and the reason, of course, that we know that is because the life expectancy of somebody with Down syndrome was less than 20, 50 years ago, and it's now 60, and so they're beginning to reach an age where they might be at risk naturally, but because of that extra chromosome, they actually develop early onset Alzheimer's disease. 100% of them get the pathology in the brain by the time they're 30 or 40, and 50, 60, 70% of them get demented by the time they're 50 or 60.
Something else. So where are things moving, how are things moving forward from a research standpoint, our future? What give us kind of a, I don't want you to paint a real rosy picture just for everybody, but at the same time, more of a realistic picture of where you think things are heading. Is there a time frame that you feel that we'll see that we can slow down the progression, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I'd love to be rosy about it, but I'm afraid that's not possible. 20 years of effort in developing an understanding of the steps that lead to Alzheimer's disease has led to lots and lots of clinical trials that, of course, started in the test tube in the mice and then are now in clinical trials. And many of them, in fact, all of them, have failed to significantly slow the course of the disease. And the reason for that is multitudinous, possibly because we're not starting early enough, possibly because the disease has many features and many of these drugs attack only one, so we may need to have a cocktail of drugs. That's more complicated to test. But there are a number of trials going on now where the first hints were encouraging. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that 5 years from now we will have our first new drugs approved by the FDA for Alzheimer's disease over and above the 4 that we have now, which are largely ineffective and have been around for 20 years. Now, our own research is based on the finding of several laboratories decades ago that people with rheumatoid arthritis almost never get Alzheimer's disease, which is very interesting. And so we hypothesized that there was something in the blood of people with rheumatoid arthritis that was either stimulating something or getting directly into the brain and changing their physiology so they tended not to get Alzheimer's disease. We think we found that protein because when we inject it into mice, not only do they not get Alzheimer's disease, but it actually gets, I don't want to say cured, but suppressed so that their cognition returns to normal and the amyloid deposits begin to go away. That's now in clinical trials because it's an FDA-approved drug for stimulating the bone marrow for something else, so we already knew it was safe. And we're very encouraged by that trial, but we don't have any results to share yet.
That's fascinating. It really is. So, because of this aging population of ours, I don't think, not that I watch the news on TV that much, but a combination of watching the news, being on the internet, a day does not go by that you don't read something about some hope, some tests that have been done. And I guess the way sometimes they release the information, maybe it gives people too much hope as it relates to Alzheimer's I'm talking about. So what suggestions do you have? Because people see this news information each and every day. How should they take it?
Right. I think that is very stressful for people who have Alzheimer's disease or their family members because it is an inexorable decline, and hope, of course, is something that we all cling to. It's sort of curious that in the media, bad news generally gets better play than good news, but in the medical, reporting, it's very often good news, a new potential approach, a new potential drug. And the advice that I have for both our fellow scientists and who don't really need the advice, that they already know it, and the general public is wait until the next shoe drops, the next study on that particular drug is done, because very often the initial studies are semi-positive, especially in the mice. The mice are actually a little easier to cure than we expected, and many drugs that have worked in the mice have been tried in humans and have failed. So have to be patient. The scientists are working as hard as we can. Our collaborators in industry, our collaborators in the federal government, our collaborators in terms of our volunteers in the clinical trials, and our philanthropists are all working to the same end, but it's a step-by-step process, and one initial finding that looks hopeful is not the end of the story.
Right. Is money a factor here? I mean, obviously you need money to do all this. And I know the federal government is putting more money towards it, my understanding.
Correct.
But, I mean, could that speed it up or not necessarily?
Well, it's the necessary fuel. We will never find a treatment for Alzheimer's disease without increased funding for research, because the clinical trials in particular are very expensive. And they're expensive because we want to make sure that we don't hurt anybody by accident. We usually have to have 50 to several hundred, sometimes 1,000 subjects in the study. That gets very expensive, and that's why the federal government and industry and philanthropists are putting more resources into this. Just give you a sense of how critical this is. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that Alzheimer's disease costs about $230 billion a year in the United States alone now. But the estimate is that the cost to Medicare and Medicaid alone will be about $1 trillion a year by 2050 if we don't solve this problem.
Yeah, it's, I see it each and every day. And when you see it each and every day and you see the numbers of people, it's mind-boggling. And those that have, fortunately, maybe have families, no one has it, they, aren't involved with it, they just aren't seeing it, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yes.
And I think we need to educate, continue to educate, as you are, helping us, the public on even how to handle situations, because I think that, you're going to go to, in the future, or near future, you're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to go to the movie theater, you're going to go somewhere in the public, and somebody around you is going to have Alzheimer's. And and how to handle that type of situation, takes a little education.
It does, and there is a big push to educate, first responders, police, because people with Alzheimer's disease may be very confused. Some of them may be combative, and of course that's not their fault. It's not them who's responding this way. It's the disease, but they have to be able to recognize it.
Just something I was, wanted to ask you is, I have discussions all the time with friends and people in the industry, and we say, how come we didn't hear about Alzheimer's years ago, and we're hearing so much now? I mean, one of the answers you brought up at the beginning, was that, we're living longer, and you might have a much greater chance of getting it the longer you live, all right? But do you think that it was just misdiagnosed in the past, and there were many more people with it, and maybe they thought they had other issues that weren't dementia?
Well, I think dementia is hard to miss. But what has happened is that it's become very clear that dementia, including the type of dementia that's caused by Alzheimer's disease and the types of dementia caused by other diseases, is not a normal form of aging. It is a disease. But because it was so common, people considered senile dementia, as it used to be called, just something that some people got and some people didn't, and it was unlucky, but it was due to aging. It is, of course, true that age is the most important risk factor for developing Alzheimer's-like dementia, but age itself doesn't guarantee that people will get it. It is a disease process, and so it's partly a redefinition. Alzheimer's disease, when Alzheimer himself discovered it in 1907 up until about 1975, was a name that was given to pre-senile dementia. That is to say, earlier onset, before the age of 60. Then it might be called Alzheimer's disease and was fairly rare. And after the age 60, it was just called senile dementia, and it was considered to be a part of aging. That changed with a realization that they were really the same disorder, and so by definition, Alzheimer's disease became more prominent. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're all living longer.
You're right. Well, good. Tell us more. We got just a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave enough time for you to tell us more about the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center, and tell us more about that. Tell us why what role they're playing. Certainly, it's a beautiful part of the country. That part I know. But tell us more about the disease center and kind of what makes it so special.
Well, as you probably know, and your readers probably know, there are Alzheimer's disease research centers scattered around the country in major medical centers. Many of them are supported by the federal government through the NIH, but we don't have one of those yet in the Rocky Mountain area. So I moved to Denver 3 years ago to set up an Alzheimer's center, and we call it the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center. It is a clinical center for treatment, and it's a research center both for preclinical translational research and for clinical research. And the website's easy to find, and we serve this entire region. We also collaborate with medical Alzheimer's centers all across the world, exchanging samples, exchanging information, and working as a team.
Just to be sure, do you happen off the top of your head know that website, or how people can learn more about the center and kind of what you're doing and others within the organization?
If you Google Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center, you'll get us.
Pop right up.
The actual website is a little long at the moment. We're trying to work on making it shorter and easier to remember, but there's no difficulty finding us.
So just do a search, click on the link, it'll take you right there. All right.
Exactly.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us on the Aging Boomers, and just want to thank you for everything you do each and every day. Really appreciate it, and I'd love to have you on in the future and keep us up to date on kind of what's going on.
Well, it's a very great honor to speak to you, Frank, and to all of your listeners. They're our collaborators. Without them, we can't do our research, so we thank them too.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Potter, Dr. Huntington Potter with the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center in Colorado. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, share our site, share our links with others. That's how we're growing. And just be safe out there, and we'll talk to you all soon.